Everybody. Welcome to Sisterhood in Crime Atlanta's Off the Shelf. Today, we are very excited to have Emily Carpenter with us. And just to introduce Emily to you guys, if you are not already familiar with her work, she is the critically acclaimed best-selling author of 5 suspense novels. She is a graduate from Auburn University, and she has a Bachelor of Arts degree in speech communication and minors in journalism and theater. She lived in New York. She has worked as an actor, producer, screenwriter, and behind-the-scenes soap opera assistant for the CBS shows As the World Turns and Guiding Light. She is born and raised in Birmingham, but now she lives in Atlanta, right here with the majority of us. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's always so funny to hear that bio read back to me because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm old. I've lived a long life. That sounds like so many of those things are a million years ago. Yeah.
Well, we always kick off this program by asking our authors to tell us a little bit about themselves aside from who they are as an author. And you do have a very interesting background. So this is the part of the program where we ask you to tell us your backstory. So tell us more about what I just read about.
Well, I think my bio really speaks to the fact that it took me a while to figure out that I wanted to write, and that was where sort of the place that I belonged, which I think a lot of us can relate to. And I kind of like that, especially to talk about that with women, just that, we have such rich stages of our career. And, it makes me glad that I was still kind of searching in my 20s and 30s because, sometimes I'm awfully glad I didn't have a book published when I was younger because, goodness knows what I would have said. We all had some strange opinions in our youth. So, it's like we always talk about, I'm so glad I didn't grow up with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter because, who knows what I would have been saying on those, channels. But yeah, I just think that I grew up a reader as a child. And so I think the common denominator in everything I was drawn to doing, everything I enjoyed as a hobby, the thing that sort of lit me up was story. And, at first I wanted to be an actress and, but that is telling a story. That's telling somebody else's story, but, granted, like amazing stories. And so that was kind of what I did in high school and a little bit in college. I kind of had this moment of realization that I probably was not smart for me to major in theater in college because I couldn't sing, and musical theater was such a big part of getting a theater degree, and I just felt really hampered in that area. But I wanted to go into acting or television, and so I got married quite young, right out of college, and my husband and I moved up to New York City. And that is where I was fortunate to get a job at CBS television, first in the advertising sales department, and then in the daytime department. The daytime programming in New York was a very small department because we had game shows and some children's programming. But just in terms of production, the only thing that was going on in New York for CBS was those 2 soap operas. Guiding Light and As the World Turns. And that was where I feel like I really learned how to write, actually, because part of my job was reading the daily scripts, and then I had to summarize what was going to happen for the week in like 4 or 5 sentences, for the AP, the Associated Press, which would then put it in all the newspapers. In the old days, y'all remember you had like a thing called a newspaper where you opened it up and you saw like what was going to be on TV that day, and the crossword puzzle and your horoscope and your bridge moves or whatever, and then it would have a little blurb for each of the soaps, and kind of if you missed your soap that week, it was going to be like what happened in the week. I think it probably ran on Friday. That makes sense, because that was like the big cliffhanger day. So yeah, that really helped me reading those scripts and figuring out, what was my main plot, my A story, what were the subplots, what were those plot points that were going to interest a viewer who had maybe missed that week. And there was soaps could go on and repeat themselves, ad nauseum, but sometimes something really did happen. So you had to, so that was kind of my training ground. And I didn't realize that I was learning how to structure a story in my head. It was just kind of happening. And then I realized acting was going to be a really tough, world to break into. And that was when my husband and I decided to move back to Atlanta and start our family. And anyway, long story short, I really realized that writing books gave me the freedom to tell the stories I wanted to tell, and to actually have other people see it. Like I had more control of the craft and of finding an audience, which, we don't have a lot of control in the publishing business, but a little more control than acting and screenwriting and that kind of thing. So that's kind of how I think the common thread is just that I love story. I make sense of the world through story. It comforts me, it entertains me. I know I can always, if I'm having a tough time, I can lose myself in a book and kind of just ease a little bit of the suffering, and it's really important. And I think it's a really noble thing, telling stories. When we tell each other stories, even just orally, to comfort the other person, it's just a little way of making this life livable and easing a little of somebody else's suffering. So I find it very noble. Sometimes I think we tend to put ourselves down and we're like, oh, well, guilty pleasure. I'm reading these books, or I feel guilty about how much time I'm spending reading books, or lost in my head daydreaming about these characters. But I think it's a noble way to spend our time.
Well, and it's also, storytelling has survived the test of time too, if you think about it. I mean, it goes eons back, and the medium might have changed, but it is something that is consistent through the centuries. So let's go. Well, first off, you reminded me of something from my, I don't know if it's youth, but when I was younger, because when I was in college, when I came home from after college, I had some time in my room to watch a soap opera or two before I went to work, because I worked in the afternoons. And I honestly don't recall what soap operas I watched, but when I started working full time, I read those summaries to catch up on what was happening. I totally forgot about that until you mentioned it.
So that was my when I look back I'm like, oh my gosh, I was so young. I was like 23 years old. And I realized I'm technically writing for the AP. This is like kind of a big deal. And
Take it, take it, utilize it, to your advantage for sure. I want to talk a little bit more about actually packing up and going to New York. Now, is your husband also from Alabama?
no, he's from here. He grew up in Atlanta, and
Mhm.
yeah, one of the few native Atlantans that you meet.
But you met at school. You
We
met
met
at
at
Auburn?
Auburn. We
Okay.
got married. He had been offered a job up in New York. And I was
Mhm.
so excited because I might have been, I was a much more timid person, I guess, as a kid and as a young girl. And I don't know that I would have had the courage to go up to New York on my own, but it had always been my dream. I had visited once with my family in college, and it was just my dream city. I just
Mhm.
loved it. So when that happened, I was like, I mean, that's probably why I married him, because I knew he had a job offer in New York. I can say that because we've been married 33 years, but yeah, I'm like, that's a good point in your favor. So let's
I
go.
love it. No, but that was kind of where I was going with that question, because that is a big leap from Birmingham, Alabama, and to New York City. And so I was curious if it was, and you answered the question because it was your husband's job offer that took you up there. But yeah, I was kind of curious. And the fact that you were interested in writing and storytelling, and that is a good place to go
Yeah.
to break into that. And so that's what I was kind of curious about. Was it you driving the let's go have an adventure? Or
No, it was really him and his job, but I was very up for it. And when I was there, I became friends with the women that worked in the casting department at CBS, and I took a couple of acting classes, which was really kind of a fun experience. And I didn't go so far as to audition. I met with the casting director once, but by then we were kind of on our way out. But in the casting department of CBS, they would audition, they would put actors on tape to audition for the TV shows that they were casting in primetime out in LA. So a lot of the so when the casting people figured out that I was good at acting and reading, I would read opposite the people auditioning. And I got to read opposite a lot of really fun people. And I met David Cassidy, my first uh, girlhood boyfriend, and that was exciting. So it was just kind of, I was around the fringes of it. It was exciting.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
never delved into it, but yeah.
it sounds wonderful. I also want to take a moment just to tell those of you that have joined us, please, if you have a question for Emily, don't be shy. Feel free to join the conversation. We highly encourage that. And if you would prefer not to speak up, totally understand. You can put your question or comment in the chat and we will talk for you. So, okay, so you're back in Atlanta, and what's happening in your life now that eventually leads you to actually writing, like writing a novel as opposed to the other work that you were
Yeah.
pursuing originally?
Yeah, I was really wanting to break into screenplay writing, and it was the late 90s. So the 90s in filmmaking was a real kind of explosion of independent film. And I it it was I was also at that time really wanting to start a family and having kids and wanting to I wanted to raise them at home myself. And so luckily my husband had a good job and we could afford that setup, which I felt really lucky to have that situation. And I was writing these screenplays, and really, in that world, agents don't really care that you've written a screenplay. It's not like truly, if you write a book, an agent wants to read that book. Like, if the description of that book interests them, they want to read it, and they will. If they like that book, they don't care who you are, where you live, what connections you have, they will sign you. But it's not like that in screenwriting in Hollywood. And so agents don't really care. So what I found myself doing was entering a lot of contests. And a couple of my screenplays got into these contests and placed, and like I was long listed for the Sundance Screenwriters Lab, which is Robert Redford's thing out in Sundance. And that was a real kind of boon to my self-esteem. I thought, you know what, maybe I have some talent in this, because I didn't really know, because it wasn't like I had majored in creative writing or had an MFA. I hadn't taken any classes. I just kind of enjoyed it, and I kind of had a feeling that maybe I was okay at it, but I didn't have any feedback. So I think that stage of my life was really helpful for getting some outside feedback. It wasn't like friends and family saying, oh, this is great. This was like outside people saying, yes, you can tell a story. Maybe it wasn't the best story, but it was enough to keep me going. And and I'm having kids and spending my days with babies and toddlers, and kind of and not sleeping. That's kind of a grind. And after a while, it occurred to me, I guess it was like in 2009 or 10, it just occurred to me, this is not gonna happen. I can't, I don't think I'm gonna be able to break into screenwriting. Nobody's gonna buy my script. And so I thought, well, and this was too around the time that people were like writing books and having them adapted into movies. I thought, well, maybe that's how I get into screenwriting, is I write a book. And it's funny, it's kind of backwards, but now I love, that's my first love, is books, right? And just read constantly as a child. So I think I'm in the place where I should be. And I actually wrote wrote two books before I wrote the book that got published. So I had two books in a drawer. There have been others since then that are in drawers. It's surprising how you can write an entire book and then just kind of look at it like, all right, that taught me something. Now you go in a drawer. It's kind of devastating, but I think, the more I've talked with other writers and authors, and even like really successful award-winning authors, you hear that.
So those first two books that you wrote, did you shop them, or did you just say, this was like a test run for me and I don't?
No, I shopped them. I shopped the first one. I didn't shop the second one. And I'm not sure I know why, but I didn't. The first one, yeah, I shopped, and I sent it. I tell people, like, I laugh when they used to tell that story of like Catherine Stockett, who wrote The Help, got turned down by 50 agents or whatever, you know, and I'm like, that's nothing. I got turned down by 162 agents.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Like, if nothing else, I'm determined.
I was gonna say that's amazing.
But yeah, at that point, I was like, okay, I think this book is, you know, has a fatal flaw, and we're just going to put it away and start over. And it was actually kind of a rom-com, but it just didn't translate for whatever reason, and it's fine. So,
mhm. So somewhere along the way, if you started in the rom-com category, somewhere along the way you switched into a different genre.
yeah, I remember the moment. So I had written that book and wrote another one that was kind of a romantic type book. They called them, you know, chick lit
Yeah.
back in the day.
Mhm.
And so I remember one night I was taking a bath because I like a bath at night. And I was thinking, you know, what I really like, and this was around the time, I don't think Gone Girl had come out yet, but I had discovered Gillian Flynn and I had read Sharp Objects when it was published. And I was like, ooh, like I remember reading it and, you know, I've always loved mystery, and I went through a huge true crime, you know, spate in the 90s, loved Anne Rule, and just not huge, not as big on detective type thrillers, but just like anything that's suspense and kind of edges into a little bit of horror, a little, you know, a little kind of like otherworldly, scary stuff. I love scary stuff. But when I read Sharp Objects, I was like, this feels like something I would like to write, that I would aspire to write. Because it's like spooky, but not necessarily supernatural, but like there are hints of that. And there's like crime and suspense, and it's very gothic. You know, there's this Victorian house, and there's like dark, shadowy, you know, it's just got that, all those gothic vibes. And I was like, I love this. And so I was in the bathtub and I was like, well, this is the kind of thing I love to read constantly and watch on TV and watch in movies. Why don't I write it? But I thought, you know, it's so complicated to do a mystery. Like you have to understand, like you have to drop the clues, and it's like this really complicated puzzle piece, you know, puzzle that you have to create and know where it's going. And I didn't know if I was smart enough to do that, you know, and to really entertain. And like suspense mystery readers are smart, you know, is all get out. They figure things out, and they are one step ahead of the story. And I was like, I don't know that I could write anything that, you know, but I thought, well, I could just try, you know, what's it gonna hurt? And so then that's when I was like, well, okay, what am I gonna write about? And then I thought, like, at that point, I think I'm trying to remember how old I was. That was like my late 40s. So, right, I start thinking about those big birthdays that come up for us, especially as women. I think like 20, 30, 40, 50, that for some reason we make them these milestone birthdays, you know, and which is kind of silly. But I thought, like, what if there was a woman who was scared to turn 30 because something had happened to all the women in her family on their 30th birthdays, and it feels like a curse. It feels like this family curse. And you know, so I was like, ooh, I got chills. And I was like, oh, I really like that idea. And I jumped out of the bathtub and wrapped myself in a towel and ran out into the bedroom. My husband's in bed. And I was like, listen to this idea. And I pitch him the story, and he sits up and he's like, oh, that's really good. He's like, what's going to happen to her on her 30th birthday? And I was like, I don't know. I'll figure it out. Like, it's,
That's not the point right now.
I mean, yeah. And so, yeah, I just kind of felt my way through that story. And that's my first book, Burying the Honeysuckle Girls, which I just absolutely loved writing. And yeah, never looked back since then.
Well, it's funny that you were describing that you recognize what your preferred genre is for reading and watching. And I am the same way, which is how I got involved in Sisters in Crime Atlanta. And but in my friends in the organization are always encouraging me, Dawn, you should write. And I'm the opposite of you, because I'm like, I don't think I can, even though I like that genre, I don't know if I can develop it. And so I'm more like, no, I want to write about something I feel like I can write, which would be, some family, situation type story. And needless to say, I don't write at all. So that is a moot point. But it's just funny that you were trying to write something that I feel like I could write that, as opposed to writing this mystery, but for the same reason. Very same reason. And you said readers, especially of this genre, are smart, and we are. And I'm not bragging on myself. I will pick it apart. I picked apart Gone Girl. And I know people love that, but I was like, I'm not buying this. There was just a few things, but I thought it was well written. I did think it was well written, but I feel like there were a few things like, you didn't think that one through. And that is a flaw in my character that sometimes prevents me from enjoying just a good story. So
yeah. There is a level of willing suspension of disbelief at some points. But yeah, that's the trick, is like to ground it. We take some of the craziest, like, bananas scenarios or events, and if you can ground it enough, I'm like, okay. It's hard though.
Okay. Linda is asking, did you ever consider publishing hardbacks, or that libraries might order?
Oh yeah. So actually, libraries can order paperbacks. I know they don't prefer, but I have had some of my local books in the library, or in my local library. I know. So for my first 5 books, I was published by Lake Union, which is an Amazon imprint, and now they started to publish in hardback as well. But at the time I was publishing, they only published in paperback. So that is typically the choice of the publisher. A lot of, the cost is just so much higher that I think a lot of publishers are just publishing in trade paperback and mass market. But I'm trying to remember. I don't know that I've ever had a library say they wouldn't order the paperback books, although they do prefer hardback. That's right. I'm not sure how that works.
Yeah, but I never realized that until just now with that question. But yeah, I guess, I don't know, maybe to avoid like damage, or if you have a paperback, the cover might rip or get frayed easily, so maybe that's why. She has another question. Did you consider publishing independently, and would you consider doing that now?
Actually, I have. So we're talking about these different genres over kind of those years of COVID lockdown. I got back into reading a lot of romance, and I love so many genres, and romance is one of them. And I was started listening to a really fantastic romance podcast called Fated Mates, which, if you like romance, I highly recommend it. Sarah McLean and Jen Prokop, and it's just so entertaining. But so during all this time, I had an idea for a contemporary romance series. So I wrote them. They're smallish books. They're kind of the length of category romances. I wrote 3 of them and a novella as part of a series called the Thornhill, Georgia series. And I independently published them under a pen name. Isla Moore, ISLA Moore, MOORE, and they're on Amazon. They're on KU, and they're just digital. They're not paperback. They're not physical copies or audio. Oh, look at the kitty. The kitty just walked across.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that was really fun. I really, really enjoyed doing that. And it was fun to write, and it just felt very low stakes and just kind of doing it for fun. And I had a blast.
So Jeff also has a question. So Jeff, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
There we go. So thank you. Emily, I've heard your name around, I guess, on the author circles for years, but I never really knew what genre you wrote in. So when you started talking romance, I was like, okay, well, you know, I read so many genres, but that's probably the one specific one that I've never been able to read. But when you started talking about Gothic and supernatural, you kind of, and especially when you were talking about Burying the Honeysuckle, that kind of hooked me. You know, because that's the kind of thing I really like to read. Although I'm stuck writing in this crime genre right now, but I'd like to break out of it. So which book of yours would you recommend I read first in that kind of a genre, you know, the supernatural or Gothic?
Not your rom-com.
Not a rom-com. No.
Yeah, it's okay. You don't have to be into the romance.
I wrote that one down. I'm going to probably try and get that.
Yeah, I think all of my books kind of fall into two, like I should clarify, my Emily Carpenter traditionally published books are all categorized as suspense. That's what my publisher categorized them as. But they do kind of fall into two different, some of them are more kind of focused on that sort of Gothic-y, I don't know. I feel like they're all in the same category, but so Burying the Honeysuckle Girls is my first book. My second book, The Weight of Lies, is one of my favorites and ended up getting kind of the most critical love, I should say. It got 2-starred reviews, one from Kirkus and one from Publishers Weekly. So it's really they've all got a little thread of horror running through them, and I guess that is part of the Gothic influence, you know. So there's, you know, always kind of a creepy house, and always a question of like, is it a ghost? Is it not a ghost? And it's generally not a ghost, which is very Gothic, you know. But there's those hints of darkness and kind of the uncanny. And yeah, so I would say Weight of Lies, maybe for you, might be.
Okay, thanks. That's what I'm looking for then.
Yeah. So Jeff is helping redirect us back to, you know, what we want to talk about, which is your books. But now one of my questions for you was curiosity and how you define your books, the genre of your books.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I was finding as I was reading up on you leading up to this conversation, Southern Gothic kept coming up. And I was curious, do you define your books as Southern Gothic?
I think they have, I would not use that as a first descriptor. I would use suspense as a first descriptor because I think Southern Gothic is a very specific thing. I feel like my books are Gothic and they're set in the South. So this gets kind of like in the weeds here and into definitions and semantics and stuff like that. But I think Southern Gothic is a very specific thing that focuses on the sins of the South and how we deal with the brokenness that is basically the legacy of slavery. And you know, it involves elements of bigotry and racism and you know, a lot of things that I feel like we can't, I can never get away from that in my books, but it's certainly not the main focus of my books. So I don't know that, I mean, there are some like elements of it in that you're gonna, a lot of times you're gonna see an old Southern home that's kind of in disrepair and crumbling, and there are gonna be some elements of that old kind of religious and possibly like in Burying the Honeysuckle Girls, there is truly an element of, you know, these are racist people and the KKK. So I would say that book is very Southern Gothic, but all of my books are just set in the South. And yeah, so
is that one thing that you would say they have in common is, you know, what else do they have in common other than maybe the Southern setting?
I think that I've typically I write a female protagonist, and it's not that I don't want to write a male protagonist. So far, I haven't really had the occasion to. I have, and that was kind of, you know, what my publisher wanted. They definitely wanted a female protagonist, and you know, whatever, that's fine. I'm a woman, so that's easy for me to do. But I have had an idea for kind of a bigger book that would involve some male perspective. So that's kind of a common thread. And I think the other common thread is that it's usually a woman who is, she's not a detective. She's not an expert on solving mysteries or crimes or anything. She is like generally trying to figure out a problem that is just that she's come upon in her family relationships, and it opens this can of worms basically into something very unexpected and deadly and like a huge secret. And you know, it's almost like this chasm opens up beneath her feet and she's standing on the edge of a cliff. So I love the idea of just a regular person who finds themselves in this desperate, deadly situation. Yeah.
Well, you've touched on another reference that I was going to segue into, and that is that your stories are so much more than just a thriller or a suspense. There tends to be a family dynamic or a relationship situation that you kind of do a deep dive in. And the one story that really comes to mind for me is The Weight of Lies. And as you said, your protagonist is not a, you know, a police officer or a detective or somebody who typically finds themselves in these situations. But The Weight of Lies was, to me, very the mother wound of that story was not your typical mother wound. It was very unexpected. And I'm trying not to give anything away because I want people to, to get your books off the shelf and read them themselves. But I like how you do these in-depth, they're almost like psychological in a soft way of getting to know people and dig a little deep into who they are.
Yeah. I will say, I think maybe we're all sort of tiring of that trope. And I say that in a kind way. I love tropes, and tropes are part of stories, but I think maybe it's getting old that we're tired of psychological suspense being about a woman who can't trust herself, who thinks she is not seeing what she's seeing, or, believes maybe she's going crazy. And, I say that in having written a protagonist like that in my first book, because that's a very real thing. I think we all sometimes doubt our own perceptions, especially when we're younger and we have people around us saying, you're not seeing what you're seeing, and, but I think psychological suspense can be found in other ways. And yeah, I do. I want my characters to be struggling with something that is real and, that people can relate with and is painful. And yeah,
So we have another question from Linda, and she says, it seems your characters do not have the tragic flaw that Southern Gothic characters have.
Yeah, I think that's a real good assessment. I think what my characters have that I like about them is that in the end, they will do what it takes to get to the truth. And Southern Gothic tends to end tragically. I mean, William Faulkner, Flannery O'Connor, Carson McCullers, it's a kind of a tragic genre.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really write that. I really do want, I want my protagonist to come out on top in a way, not only just for them to solve the mystery and catch the bad guy, but I want them to come to terms with themselves and how they have maybe gone wrong in life, and how they can come to an understanding and love themselves and trust themselves. Yeah. So
I love when I'm talking with an author and I find out that they have so much intention in their writing. And because I think as a reader, we're looking for the entertainment of it, and then when you glean something from it, of course, I always learn something. And then to talk to a writer and find out, no, I intentionally was setting up these challenges for my character to go through and overcome. And I think, wow, like it wasn't just a story that they thought of, it was actually on purpose that they had these exercises of development. So I love that. And it makes me almost wonder sometimes, like, do you have a background in psychology? Because it's so deep and sometimes, and that's what I'm hearing from you.
Well, I love that. Yeah. For me, it's not, I always say you can read my books and hopefully you can enjoy them on either level. I hope, if you're just there for a cracking suspense mystery, you just want to have a good time, spend a couple hours reading a, banana pants book, enjoy. I hope that it satisfies on that level. But if you want to enjoy it on a deeper level, psychologically or thematically even, that stuff is in there because it's not interesting to me unless it's got that kind of stuff going on. I'm like, buddy, I was the one in English class that was like, the old man in the sea lying in the boat like this represents Christ on the cross. You know, I love that stuff. I love metaphor. And, you know, half the class is rolling their eyes because there's no way the author meant all this symbolism and stuff.
Right.
But I was on the front row going, yes, I love that. That is, you know, everything's got to have a deeper metaphor. So it's there if you want it. And if you don't care for it, if you just want a good mystery, I hope it serves that purpose.
So, well, let's talk a little bit about your book. So you've touched on Burying the Honeysuckle Girls, and we've talked a little bit about The Weight of Lies. And now let's talk about your next book was Every Single Secret, and leading up to your most recent, which is Reviving the Hawthorne Sisters. So what's Every Little Secret about?
So Every Single Secret is kind of a book. The little kernel that inspired that is a movie that I watched that is in one of my top 10. It's a really kind of scary horror movie. So it's called Ex Machina. It's an Alex Garland movie, and it's set in this house. I mean, you rarely leave the house. I think the beginning and the end, they get outside the house, but so it's a great, fascinating, really horror movie, but I think tons of suspense and like this building dread. And I was really inspired to write something that took place in one house. And let me tell you, when I got like 3/4 or 2/3 of the way through that first draft, I thought, why did I do this to myself? I gotta get out of this house that I have trapped my two protagonists in. And it was a challenge, but then I started incorporating some flashbacks of my main character's childhood and how she grew up, and that opened it up a little bit and brought in some fresh air and room to kind of play with the story. But yeah, I really love that story. Was very much about a relationship, an engaged couple. And that one's very, very psychological suspense, and it's got that closed room feeling to it. So, and then after that is a book called Until the Day I Die. And that was a lot of fun to write as well. It's really opened up. Like you can tell it's like a response to me writing this claustrophobic book. It's like takes place all over the place. Caribbean island, people are jumping off cliffs and waterfalls and running and rolling around. It's crazy. So that was really fun to write because it's a little bit more of it's got more action. It's a little more of a thriller. And it's also I've got a teenage girl who's one of the points of view, and that was really fun to write. And it's about a small tech company that's developed an app that automatically budgets for you and then pays your taxes for you. So that was kind of fun to learn about kind of the basics of developing an app. It was just interesting to me to do the research, and I talked to a really cool guy who works out in Silicon Valley and does that for a living. So I kept saying, like, is this possible? Could I? And he was like, not right now, not the way things are now. But anyway, that was really fun to write. And then my last book is Reviving the Hawthorne Sisters, which is kind of a sequel-ish. It's a follow-up book to Burying the Honeysuckle Girls. It kind of delves into more of the life of a character from that book named Dove and how she came to be who she is.
Yeah, I like how you tied that around, because it initially you were on this path of like standalones, And
Yeah.
I know Reviving the Hawthorne Sisters can be a standalone. You don't need to read Burying the Honeysuckle Girls in order to enjoy that. But I do like the way you brought them back around.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it can be enjoyed alone, but yeah, it is a more complete experience if you know the first story. So
Mhm.
yeah.
So that leads us to asking about the titles of your books. Liz has said your titles are great. Did you come up with them or did the publisher suggest them?
A mix of both. I think I've gotten better at titling as kind of I've learned more about sort of the marketing aspect and just what I like. So Burying the Honeysuckle Girls was a tough one. And we went through a lot of names with that, but the person who came up with that name was an intern that worked at my agent's agency. So, and I don't even know her name, and it's I that's terrible. But anyway, she came up with that title. I mean, we had like lists of like everything you could think of, but she came up with that title, and I was like, that's good. That's a mouthful. It's hard for me to say, Burying the Honeysuckle Girls. I can finally say it now. But Weight of Lies was originally titled Kitten. And if you've read that book, you'll know what kitten refers to. I loved Kitten and I fought for Kitten, and my publisher did not want that. And I'm still not sure what the Weight of Lies means or has to do with lies are heavy. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
It just felt a little generic to me. So,
well, just in talking about that, and you said that book was very well received. And so now are you, even though you just said, I'm not sure how it still ties in, but are you glad? Do you think the book would have been as successful with just Kitten as the title?
I think it would have. I don't know. I tend to, marketing comes from a different angle. They want a book to really tell the reader what they're getting, and I understand that. But I'm always like, trust the reader. These they are smart. They figure out twists. They're gonna read Kitten and see the cover, and they're gonna be intrigued.
Well,
but who knows? I mean,
the cover is a perfect thing to discuss. Your covers are great.
Yeah.
And as a reader, I will tell you, I'm drawn to a title if the title sounds good, and I pull out the book and I look at the cover, and that's going to tell me if I want to flip it over and read the backside to understand what the book is about and if I'm going to go buy it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're right.
I do think there is a tendency to be risk averse when they're thinking of titles, and they want a title that kind of generally suggests a lot of other books, and I tend to be like, no, be different, stand out, like get attention by being really different. I laugh so hard, and there is a horror novel that I bought. I think it's by Brian Asman. But the name of the book is Man F Word This House. That is the title of the book. And sorry to curse ish. I laughed so hard when I saw that. I was like, dude, I'm automatically buying this book because that is the title of your book. So I guess I'm on the fringes of titles, like the weirder, the better. I'm like, ooh, what's this?
Yeah, for sure. All right. So we are getting close to our hour. So let's talk about like what's coming up for you. What can we look for next from Emily Carpenter or Isla Moore?
Oh, Isla Moore is probably retired. I don't know. Isla Moore had a short and successful career. No, I would love, I know I have such respect for romance writers. I'm just like, I'm not worthy. They're so talented at doing what they do. So that was fun. But I'm really excited because I will hopefully have some good news very soon in the next couple of weeks about my next book. But yeah, I'm really excited about this one. It's about a woman and her husband and daughter who have gone through kind of COVID, the pandemic in New York. She lost her restaurant, and they are looking for a change. And they discovered that there is a small town in Georgia who is offering people financial incentives and other incentives to move to this town. And like if they're remote workers, to kind of revitalize the economy of this town. And but there are some very dark secrets in this little town, and the people who live there are interesting. And yeah, so things go awry.
Well, I am looking forward to that. It sounds great.
Yeah. It was a
One
lot.
last question from Linda. She said, I've been using a pen name for my books because I didn't have a lot of confidence. Now I'm regretting that decision. Do you ever wish you had used your actual name for the romance novels?
Yeah, I wondered about that. It was just such a different genre that I just was like, maybe I just should use a pen name. But everybody knows, like everybody who is close, like all my friends and writer friends know that it's me. But yeah, maybe sometimes I do think I should have used Emily Carpenter to sell them. But also part of me was really nervous because I was like, what if they're not good? What
No,
if
I
I'm
get
the one
it.
that thinks they're good?
I get it. No, I totally understand why you and because also you have built a brand
Yeah,
as Emily Carpenter in this, genre. So I can totally see where
yeah.
you're like, yeah,
It just,
let's not.
that felt like a kind of a no-brainer because yeah, I have Emily Carpenter books and I have Isla Moore books, and it also really felt like kind of an experiment. But yeah, I can see that it would be tough to have written books that you're really proud of and want to, but I mean, and maybe an agent can advise you, but I just say, like, depending on the size of the audience that you've built up, go ahead and switch to your real name for the next one. And just try to get the word out.
Yeah, like I have seen sometimes where they'll say, Emily Carpenter writing as
Right.
Isla Moore.
Yeah.
So maybe something, along those lines, Linda, might work. I'm curious. I want to see how that works out for you. So, okay, well, we are right at the 1 hour. Emily, this has been great. I really enjoyed chatting with you. I had my sights on you for a while. I feel like I became aware of you from the back room. Were you on the back room?
That sounds familiar. But I've done so many things now, I can't remember, but that sounds very familiar.
Yeah. And so I'm excited that I did have the opportunity to to connect with you in this format. And just one last question. When do I know you're waiting for good news on your upcoming book, but do you know when it like, if you get the good news, is that we're publishing or we're releasing?
We're publishing. It's
Okay.
publishing news. Yeah. So we are hammering out a contract. And so I don't know, y'all have seen the like in the publisher's lunch or whatever when they publish kind of the news. Technically, that's kind of the moment when you can let it out or when the contract's been signed. So I can't really say anything about it yet because we're in the middle of, but yeah.
But we can keep up with you through your website, and we'll stay in the know.
Yeah, mostly I'm on Instagram. I'm not on Facebook much anymore. I just find Instagram a little lighter and sunnier.
Okay.
And so yeah, I'm Emily DC, D.C. On Instagram.
All right. So
actually it's Emily D. Anyway, blah blah. You can find me.
Okay, so that's what we'll do. And again, thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning with us. Thank you to those of you in the audience. I hope you are encouraged to pick up Emily's books if you haven't already. And we look forward to what's next for you.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you guys. What a wonderful organization. And hey guys, thanks for showing up on Saturday morning.
Yes, and the sun is coming out for those of you in Atlanta, so maybe it's going to be a beautiful day after all.
Yes.
You can see it streaming through my window.
Oh yeah.
It drives me crazy. Although it makes me look like
can I ask her a quick question?
Absolutely.
It doesn't make any sense. Did I teach you at Auburn?
What's your name?
Mary Belk. I taught anthropology.
Mary Belk.
But did you take anthropology?
I very well might have.
What's your name? I mean, I taught thousands of students, but your name just sounds so familiar. But
well, I was Emily Drake back then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you did, and maybe you didn't.
You know what class I did take? I might have taken anthropology. That does sound familiar. I don't remember every class I took, but I did take a class called mate selection.
No, I didn't do that. Were you there when they did you were you there when they did U101 and all? Did you take U101?
That does not ring a bell.
Okay, I think it was probably a little before you
a little
there.
before. Well,
Anyway.
we're Eagle.
Yeah, tell Fair Pete then.
I love it. I'm so glad to meet you. That's so funny.
Well, I wish I'd taught you, but thank you.
Well, I hope you did teach me, and I just can't remember because I have a bad memory.
All right. Me too.
Well, thank you, everybody. Hopefully we'll see you next month for Off the Shelf. Keep an eye on the Facebook page. We are trying to get Instagram to also be a means of communication for Off the Shelf. So we're working on it. We're plugging away.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dawn.
Thank you, Emily. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed it.
Bye, y'all.
All right. Bye, everyone.